Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, today we're diving into a really fascinating, kind of baffling technological mystery. Think about this for a second. Why do some of the most highly sophisticated, incredibly well-funded organizations in the world just leave their digital front doors wide open? We're talking about massive governments, global sports brands, top-tier universities, world-renowned museums. They have massive IT budgets, they have brilliant engineers, and yet their foundational internet infrastructure is often quietly, dangerously vulnerable. So we're going to unpack exactly why this happens and how a brand new standard is finally bringing all this invisible rot into the light. Here's how we're going to map out our assessment of global DNS health today. We'll start with the invisible security gap, then introduce NODA, the dual-access solution. After that, we'll dig into the science behind the score, look at some genuinely surprising sector data findings, and wrap up with the future of DNS assessment. All right, part one, the invisible security gap. So you know how DNS is basically the invisible plumbing of the internet, right? It's absolutely critical, but because it sits perfectly hidden behind the walls, it usually only gets attention or funding when a massive, highly visible threat forces the issue. And that leads us to this massive paradox. Why do the world's top institutions completely fail at basic DNS security? We all just kind of assume that because an organization has a huge budget and technical chops, they've got their fundamentals locked down tight. But as you'll see, that is a really dangerous assumption. Because there is a serious core tension hiding in the data here. On one side of the coin, we have health. For the vast majority of these major institutions, their current operational function is great. The website resolves, the emails go through, uptime is basically a solved problem. But then you flip the coin to best practice, the actual standards conformance, and it's a totally different story. This is where the hygiene and security layers are just wildly inconsistent. The infrastructure works today, sure, but the security posture, it's literally a generation behind.
Moving on to Section 2, NODA, the dual-access solution.
So to actually look at this discrepancy clearly, we need a tool that takes this invisible rot and makes it visible, without just mashing all the metrics together into one confusing, useless number. Enter NODA, or the Network Operational Domain Assessment. NODA is a completely vendor-neutral, dual-access methodology. And that dual-access part, that's the real game changer here. It independently scores a domain's current day-to-day health against its best practice conformance. Plus, it persistently stores every single assessment report, which creates a definitive historical ledger of domain's hygiene over time. Now, under the hood, NODA's engine runs 41 total checks. 37 of those are scored, and 4 are just informational. Every single one is mapped directly to established RFC standards, and they're distributed across 5 carefully weighted categories. Infrastructure does the heaviest lifting at 30%, followed by security at 25%, email authentication at 20%, reliability at 15%, and finally, operational best practices, rounding it out at 10%.
All right, Section 3, let's look at the science behind the score.
Because, let's be real, a score is only as good as the methodology generating it. Transparency and rigor are absolutely paramount. NODA is fully deterministic and operates in 3 distinct phases. First is discovery, which is passively resolving the authoritative delegation chain. Next is enumeration, collecting all those relevant technical records like SOA, MX, and DNS key. And finally, verification, where those 41 checks execute deterministically against the data. And the best part? It does all this by pulling real-time data directly from a self-hosted unbound resolver, meaning the results you see reflect exactly what the wider internet actually sees, no illusions. And to make sure the score actually holds weight year over year, NODA adheres to a really strict SemVer-style versioning policy. They self-impose a hard limitation. Major scoring model changes can only happen a maximum of once every 12 months. This is huge for historical consistency. It means an organization won't just have its score randomly tank overnight because the testing tools secretly tweaked its algorithm. It proved NODA has serious institutional rigor and credibility. Okay, Section 4. This is where it gets really good. Surprising sector data findings. Let's actually apply this methodology to the real world. We've got fresh research covering 596 live domains across 9 major global sectors. And what this dataset reveals is, quite frankly, mind-blowing. It proves that institutional habits, not overall technical capability, are what actually dictate an organization's vulnerabilities. When you break this down across governments, universities, museums, and sports brands, you see a wild story. We tracked 104 universities, 103 museums, 102 sports brands, and 80 non-US government domains, looking specifically at DNSSEC adoption, missing DKIM email authentication, and single AS infrastructure, which just means relying on one single network provider. The huge takeaway here,
Technical sophistication does not transfer evenly across security disciplines. A sector can be absolute rock stars at one metric and completely drop the ball on another.
Take government agencies, for example. And keep in mind, these are non-US mandate jurisdictions, so no central authority forced them to do this. Yet, they have the highest DNSSEC adoption at 33.8%. They lead the world in zone signing. But then, look at their email. They completely fail at email authentication. 74.6% are missing DKIM signatures entirely. It's wild irony. A strong institutional habit around signing zones simply doesn't automatically extend to securing their email streams.
Now let's pivot over to e-commerce and sports brands. 97.1%. That is a staggering number. That is the percentage of major global sports brands operating without DNSSEC. Almost the entire sector. This leaves their massive e-commerce checkouts, their loyalty programs, their login flows incredibly vulnerable to silent DNS redirection. They are selling millisecond-tuned, cutting-edge running shoes, but they leave the digital storefront unlocked. It's crazy.
But here's the flip side of that exact same coin. Those same sports brands that completely ignore DNSSEC, they absolutely dominate in DMARC P equals reject enforcement, sitting at 46.1%. Why? Because they actively fund defenses against threats they can see. Brand impersonation phishing directly impacts customer trust and ruins their bottom line, so they throw money at DMARC. The hygiene only gets fixed where the threat is highly visible. Meanwhile, let's look at the cultural sector. 75.7%, so literally over 3/4 of the world's greatest museums, run their entire authoritative DNS from a single autonomous system. That is a massive, glaring single point of failure. If that one single provider goes down or just has a bad misconfiguration, that museum's entire digital presence, ticketing, donations, everything, just vanishes from the internet instantly. So what's the grand takeaway here? Well, to quote the research directly, technical sophistication is not the strongest predictor of DNS security posture. Security hygiene is all about specific institutional habits, not general capability. If an organization has the budget and a champion for one very specific security protocol, yeah, they'll do it well. But that absolutely does not mean they've bothered to lock the rest of the doors.
All right, final section, Section 5, the future of DNS assessment.
We are at a point where standardizing these metrics is no longer optional for the modern internet. The urgency is literally growing every single day. We're seeing a massive rise in supply chain trust issues, relentless email spoofing, and hijacking threats. And as we just saw with this sector data, there are huge gaping blind spots, even inside organizations that pride themselves on multi-layered security. We can't afford to leave this infrastructure rot invisible anymore. We desperately need standardized, citable, reproducible metrics to hold vendors and institutions accountable.
Which frames the future perfectly. Just think about how SSL Labs became the absolute, non-negotiable industry standard for TLS web security. NODA is on that exact same trajectory for DNS assessment. It takes DNS hygiene from this vague, I think we're okay feeling, to a concrete dual-axis metric that you can actually track, improve, and audit year over year.
We've seen it across the board today. Global sports brands, prestigious universities, massive governments. They all have hidden vulnerabilities. Simply having technical sophistication does not guarantee your digital front door is locked. So I'll leave you with this. What exactly is your domain's best practice score hiding right now? Go run your domain through a dual-axis assessment and find out for yourself. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the right questions.